All right, we are live and recording. So thank you for joining. Really appreciate the participation here. And let's go ahead and kick some things off. So we'll do some introductions first. My name is Alec, and I'm a technical account manager here at Accelo. I've been with the company for a little bit under a year now, and I'm a part of our customer success team. I'm really excited to be co-hosting our first live training webinar series, which we hope will be one of many as a value add to all Accelo users. And I'm joined by Matty, who is one of our product experts here at Accelo. Matty is an implementation manager and also part of our customer success team. He's been with Accelo for about a year and a half, and he's really been spearheading this webinar series project. So we'll take a look at the agenda now. Okay, here we go. So we've structured this webinar series a little bit differently. Instead of choosing the topics ourselves, all areas we'll be covering in the live training are actual questions, scenarios, and use cases that real clients has asked our team during expert services sessions. And I'm sure many of you have heard of Accelo's expert services before, and I'll spend a bit more time today explaining how it works towards the end of the session. But the purpose of this webinar is to really dig into the configuration of Accelo and also to explain best practices for actual usage inside of the system. And we're running our first session on invoicing best practices because it is really one of the most popular topics covered during expert services. And on top of that, it's an absolutely critical piece of functionality inside of Accelo for all of our clients. The topics that we're going to be covering today, as you can see on the PowerPoint, include invoice template styling and custom fields, work report summaries on invoices, invoicing workflows and how to improve this process, consolidating work onto a single invoice, and last but not least, filtering and finding the invoices that you need. One more thing before we get going, if you have any questions along the way, please go ahead and add them into the Zoom chat function. We will try to answer all questions throughout the session and also during the live Q&A at the end. However, if we're not able to do so, don't worry, because we're going to be responding to every single question via email after the session. So without further ado, we will jump into some live training. All right, so I'm going to let Matty take the show now, but I'll start off with a question just to kind of get things going. So Matty, it's common that our customers like to understand the flexibility and the capabilities of our invoice templates, like making them look and feel how they need to in terms of styling and what information is included on them. Could you show us some of the customization options for the invoice templates and then also some tips along the way?
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Matty. Awesome to be here. Alec, you're absolutely right. Invoice templates, along with our quote templates and a few other templates in Accelo, are really popular tools giving our Accelo users the powerful customization options that they need to present, create, and provide invoices or other documents to their clients. So if you've ever been a part of Accelo's implementation before, or if you've maybe been a part of expert services, you may know that invoice templates or quote templates or proposal templates are actually something that we often help you out with. Today, I will be showing you how we can customize these pieces so that you can do it for yourself. The templates themselves are really boilerplates, and they can really be used continuously over time and reused for any real-life invoice that is being created. So every setting, every visual customization and option that you tweak and adjust can be used and set on that real-life invoice. So what I'm going to do is demo how we can customize some of those details and walk you through some tips and tricks along the way. So first things first, I'm going to show you down underneath our settings. As long as you do have the ability, of course, to customize your invoice templates, you will have this available to you. But under settings, scrolling down on the left-hand side, under invoicing and pricing, and finally invoice templates. So if you haven't customized any invoice templates yet, then by default, Accelo will give you access to a handful of templates that have already been pre-created. Now, these are pretty standard There's some slight variations in the settings between the different templates that are our defaults. I would probably recommend using these as your base and then customizing them, tweaking and adjusting as you need. So what we can see here is our single default template. And to edit this template, I can select default, the title, or the pencil icon on the right. Now inside the invoice template, there's a bunch of settings. Don't get overwhelmed because it's actually really simple if you understand the breakdown of this page. Firstly, we have our title. So I'm going to rename this to be a fixed price invoice. Now, every time we create an invoice and want to set the budget or set the price that we are invoicing for, we are going to select the fixed price template. Leaving the fields up the top as is, the next section in the middle and the biggest section is our services. To simplify this, we have three areas. Firstly, they are to do with all of your billable work objects. So everything, all settings to do with your projects will be here, your tickets and your retainers, as long as you have access to these modules, of course, within your Accelo deployment. If we, for example, wanted to create an invoice template that was maybe for a deposit, let's say 20 or 25% upfront, then we could simply change the percentage value over here and save this template. Now, every time we use this template, the total budget that we're invoicing is going to be 20 or 25%. There are a few other options from the drop downs here. Work done, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Percentage complete, which shows how much you have actually completed of the project in this case, or remaining budget. So if we have, let's say, invoice for 20% upfront, the remaining budget would be the remaining 80%. Now, there's a few other details down here. I know there was a question in our earlier session, which we ran, which was around including only the time that's been approved by our team members. So we can set this on the invoice template as well. Maybe only showing all work on the invoice that has already previously been approved. By default, this is just set to all. Another quick tip, you can set your service items, which, as I'm sure hopefully most of you will know, the service item is that combination of your account ledger and your tax code. And if you don't accept tax, then the tax code would most likely be no tax at 0%. So we use the service item to match and map the details on the invoice with your accounting software. Now, these are primarily the same across tickets and projects, and retainers have a few different variations in there. We're going to come back and dig in a little bit more into some of these options shortly. But what I did want to walk through is just these sections in between. So if we want to include materials and expenses on our invoice template, then selecting these tick boxes will allow us to do so on the final version. Examples of materials might be software licenses or products, compared to an expense that might be accommodation or food that we can on-charge to the customer. So by selecting these, that automatically populates in the invoice template for us. The final section on this page that I do want to just briefly cover is your email template. Now, by default, we want to give your invoice a title. This is going to be the title that you will find in Accelo, as well as the title that will push over to QuickBooks or Xero, whichever tool you're integrated with. You do have only a limited number of merge fields that you can use on your invoice title, so be wary of the help text beneath. I will dig into that a little bit more later. Finally, on the right-hand side, we have our default terms. So if we have a raise date to be today, we could set this to be 14, 30 days, whatever the default is that we are that our tickets will be raised to being due. That's your default terms. Now, if we select this invoice, then it's going to default to 14 days. Finally, down below is your email. So as soon as we create an as soon as we create an invoice in Accelo and we go to email the invoice out to the customer, then this is the pre-populated activity that is created. So you can use merge fields in here, like you've seen. You can customize this to be whatever you like, using a bunch of the formatting tools down at the bottom, and our merge fields on the right-hand side. And there's a number of merge fields that I'd recommend taking a look through if you haven't already. These merge fields are often accessible on all types of objects across Accelo, including, in this case, the invoice. Now, the next step that I want to walk you through is actually customizing, making it look and feel a way that's going to be suitable to our branding to make it really attractive to the customers that we're sending it to. First things first, because I've added some additional sections, I just need to click Save down below and reopen the invoice. So just jumping back in here and scrolling back down to the bottom, clicking Preview and Edit PDF in that blue button. Now, again, if you haven't customized your invoices in the past and you've just been using Accelo's defaults or continuing with the defaults set in QuickBooks or Xero, then this is maybe going to be new for you. I'm going to walk you through how to make some changes and some pretty neat tips and tricks. So first things first, we have these sections. We've got two sections up the top, one section down beneath, and then there's a section right down the very bottom where we can include additional information. What I'm going to first do is include some HTML text so that we can see a little bit of additional formatting that we can provide. Within the toolbar at the top, you can see all, again, the formatting options and the customizations in how we might want to set up the text. But what I'm going to do is remove everything out of this section here in the middle and the top. Selecting this little source icon, we actually have the ability to include HTML text. Now, I've got some pre-formatted HTML that I'm going to include. This is something, again, if you were to be a part of expert services or implementation, that we would probably do for you. But if you are tech savvy and able to add in your own code, then absolutely go ahead and see what you can do. In this case, I am adding, oops, sorry, I need to add that one up top here. We're adding the invoice number and a little box for raise date and due date. In the middle section just beneath, I'm going to include some more text or some more HTML code and add a bill to box and a PO number box on the right-hand side. Now, I might see if one of my team members on the call is able to copy this and plug it into the live chat so that you guys are able to use this code as well if you'd like. I do know that some of our customers from the earlier call were eager to get their hands on the HTML so that they can tweak and customize it as well. Under the raised and due dates, we can, of course, use our merge fields. So merge fields are available in the top left corner. And if we scroll down, we can see the information that's specific to this invoice. In particular, created date will be your raise date. Insert that code, and due date will be in the due date field. One other section that I'm going to change is this top left area. And often this is going to be information specific to your business. So what I'm going to do here is actually include our Accelo San Francisco office address. You can use the current text that was previously in there, which was the account phone, account email, and account address, but this will need to be set in your invoice settings. So I'm just taking a quick step ahead and including our address there. Now we have this invoice logo merge field. This is going to pull in as long as you've uploaded your uploaded your business logo into Accelo. A nice little trick that I often implement for my clients is to actually pull in the logo from the top left of the deployment. You can pull in any image into your invoice and quote templates. So I've just pulled that from the deployment. You can do the same from your desktop and pull it in. And selecting the image itself, you have ability to change the size or the format. So I'm going to make this one a little bit smaller so it matches the kind of layout of this invoice. If you don't want it to be a 100, 50, or 25, we can, of course, go into the source code and start customizing the width or the sizing. So a neat little trick there for you guys. See what you can do with that top section to make it look and feel how you'd like. What I'm going to do is go down to the bottom area here. Now, for this invoice template, we don't really care about the subtotal, and maybe, for example, we're not going to accept tax or GST. So instead, I can take these sections out, removing them there, and then including the total up the top. So there are 4 boxes vertically and then 2 horizontally, making a 4x2 grid here. You can use and add whatever information you'd like in here. Now, your currency merge field is going to pull in based on your deployment currency. Now, as you know, Accelo can only accept one currency and bill for one currency. That is something that we are definitely looking into releasing in the near future. But for now, I'm going to remove that and just put the dollar signs. That simplifies the bottom section in quite a few easy steps. This bottom area, what we often see being used for is things like how to make payment. So do you have a bank account or a direct deposit account that you are to send, or you are to have your customers send their payment to? Or if you would like, you can actually include Accelo's credit card link or PayPal link. Now, these use our integrations with Stripe, PayPal, and Authorize.net to accept payment through credit card or PayPal. Selecting either of these merge fields and including over here will pull in a unique link, and then when the invoice is created and sent to the customer, they can click that button and go through the payment portal process. Now, that will use the gateway for Stripe or Authorize or PayPal to process the payment. That can then go into QuickBooks or Xero or however you accept payment. Or you don't need to integrate with those tools. You can accept payment through that payment platform and see the payment made in Accelo. Now, the final piece to this invoice template is this middle section, the invoice line items. So selecting back here under settings, there's a few options to customize this area. We can expand each of these to change the styling or the font, change this color from gray to blue, and of course, services, toggling on the columns that we actually care the most about. So in this scenario, let's say we're not accepting tax. I can remove tax and remove the amount because it's no longer needed. I can keep hours and rate, or maybe rename these to quantity and price. I can rename every column in Accelo's invoice line items. So you can get a little bit creative with what you want to use. You can actually overwrite and rename the titles of the sections or the little tables here as well. So rather than services, maybe maybe we want this to be work information or work to be done or whatever we'd like to name it. I'm just going to call it work for the moment. The same we can do within your materials and your expenses, expanding these and removing or editing those columns and titles. I'm going to leave everything as is for sake of time. But the final thing that I did want to show you is just the file name. So right now, this is invoice_invoice number, which is whatever the invoice number will be next in Accelo or pulling in from QuickBooks or Xero. But if we want, we can include additional merge fields. So I want to include our company, the organization that we are billing, and include that in the PDF file name. Now, as you know, whenever you create an invoice in Accelo, it creates an invoice that is a PDF document that can be sent via email, or you can see it within the client portal. I'm going to save and close, and save once again. Just be wary, saving and closing saves the visual, but saving here will save all the settings one more time. And I'll throw it back to you, Alex.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Maddie. I know this next question does come up a lot, but how can our users include additional information on an invoice that is perhaps pulled from another object, like a sale or a project? So, a great example that I have in mind would be a PO number, which is typically captured at the end of the sale workflow. Invoices aren't connected to sales. So, with that being said, how can that information be pushed through to the invoice?
Yeah, really good question. And this one comes up a lot, especially in implementation and expert services sessions. So you've got a PO number and maybe you accept it or you collect that information on the sale. But as you know, the sale doesn't really cause an invoice. We need to have a sale convert to a quote. Sorry, we need the sale quote to convert to a project, and then the project which we can invoice for, right? So using that terminology or that understanding of the flow through Accelo's objects, sale, quote, project, invoice, we can actually push data through each object as long as they're related. So what we're going to do here is first go to our sales and look at our custom profile fields. Now, custom profile fields and custom fields, which you might have seen if you are looking at, let's say, a sales type, sound pretty much the same, but are slightly different. Your custom profile fields allow you to set fields along multiple work objects, whereas custom fields are specific to this type. So for example, this default sales type, the custom field is only going to be available on this unique sale. Custom profile fields will be available on all types as long as it is selected for that object. So what I'm going to do is select custom profile fields and add a new profile. Now the example was a PO number, and this is really, really common. So a PO number, which we may accept or collect on the sale, is what the field we are going to create is. Now, PO numbers may be alphanumeric, depending on how you set them up. So leaving this as a text type field is absolutely fine. You do have a bunch of options that you can select as custom profile fields, as you can with custom fields as well, such as integer or decimal, for example. Now, in order to make this custom profile field work the way that we want it to, we're going to have to make it visible on Create. This means that when we create a sale, it is able to be added on that field, or sorry, on that sale, the field will be available to be added. Now, this is important. It does play into the fact that it will roll through to the other work objects. So just be wary to include that. Now, we also want this field to be exclusive. This means that whenever you set this PO number on a sale, that only one field can be added for the PO number. Some custom profile fields or custom fields, you can have multiple entries. In this case, exclusive means that it can only be the one. And that makes sense for our sale and our project and our invoice. We only want one PO number flowing through the entire workflow. This does also mean that you can edit it as well. So you can edit the PO number once the sale has been created, even after you've already added in the text into the field. Now, we don't need this to be required because this would then ask us to fill it in straight away. And as you know, we only maybe know the PO number towards the end. So leaving that blank is okay. Do we want this custom profile field to be exported? So if you export data from Accelo's sales list, for example, do we want the PO number to be available as a column? Most of the time, I select this as yes, or ticket. Now, some of you have probably seen this field before, the unified field. Unified is kind of related to what we're doing at the moment, but slightly different in the way that it's used. Unified is almost always on the company level. So as you saw when I selected that, only company is the tick box below. The reason is that unified fields have to be collected or captured on the company, but then they push through to all other objects. So in this scenario, for a PO number that's specific to a sale, a project, and an invoice, a unified field isn't going to work. But for something maybe like an SLA or a note or some important information that we want to always see on every single object, for example, every sale, every project, every ticket, every retainer, setting a unified field on the company level is going to be your best bet. Now, in order to have this custom profile field flow through to the other areas or the other objects in Accelo, we do need to select to apply to other objects. So let's remove company. We don't need it there, but we do need it on the sale. We do need it on the project, and we do need it on the invoice. Saving here is going to save the field. And now if I jump to projects, same custom profile fields under project, we're going to see the PO number, the same PO number that we just created on the sale. And if we go to our invoice to invoice fields under custom profile fields, we have exactly the same PO number. So this means that all of them have been created at the same time. Now the flow is going to be consistent. The final piece of this was actually editing the sale type so that we can capture that data field. Now, in this use case, it was when the sale was marked as won. So we're looking here, and of course, this is only if you have permission or the capabilities to edit your types. If you don't, you might need to reach out to an administrator user to make the adjustments here. But once a sale is marked as won, and we go from the status to this won status progression, then we want to include an action. And the action is going to be to update the field. Now, the field that we're going to select in this case is going to be our PO number at the bottom. And at this point, we can actually make the field required. So whenever the sale is marked as won, this field is going to pop open. You'll be required to add in a PO number. The sale quote can then be created or converted, and that conversion turns into a project, and from the project, you can create an invoice. And across all of those other objects, that exact PO number is going to flow through. One final thing that I will update is just our invoice template that we built just a moment ago, because there was that empty PO number box. Now that we've created a custom profile field and it sits on the sale, the project, and the invoice, we get an additional merge field. And that is the invoice custom profile field for the PO number. If we go back and preview and edit and select that merge field once again over here, pasting into the box, we now have a PO number going from the sale to the quote, to the project, to the invoice, and actually showing on the invoice as well. I'm going to save and close this one out once again, and I'll throw it back to you, Alec.
All right. Thanks again, Matty. And just as a quick reminder, I do see that everyone has been, or not everyone, but a lot of people have been using the chat to post some questions. So definitely encourage you to keep those coming. Like I mentioned before, we're not going to be able to answer all of them during this session, but we will definitely respond to everyone via email afterwards. So definitely feel free to keep those coming in so you can get the most out of this. But let's go on to the next question. So Matty, so far you've shown us a fixed price invoice template. And I see this being valuable for upfront deposit invoicing or invoicing at perhaps a project completion. But what about for work done, where we only bill for the time that was logged? Can we show the actual breakdown of time logged on the invoice? Because sometimes customers want to see all work logged as a report on the invoice.
Yeah, awesome. This one we do see pretty often as well, in particular for those work done or time and materials invoices. Maybe if you're doing, let's say, a retainer, and at the end of the month, you are billing for all the work that's been logged, but your customer, they want to know the actual breakdown of all the activities, all the information that your team members have logged in the form of a report. So that is definitely something we can include on your work done invoice template. So what I'm going to do is, rather than updating our fixed price, because we're going to use this for other invoicing methods, such as creating an invoice on a project at deposit, or maybe at completion of a project. So what we're going to do here is instead duplicate the invoice. This is going to pull all the styling, all the customizations that we previously made, and create a copy. And let's give this a new name. We'll call it work done. Otherwise, you might call it time and materials or something similar. A few different things that we're going to change in the settings here will be the line item settings for this budget. So in this case, we're billing for the work that's been logged. So let's change this to work done. We've changed it to work done on both the project and the ticket. Now, assuming that a retainer is maybe post-paid compared to a prepaid retainer, that's when the work done invoice is going to be most suited. We've talked about the settings in the middle, but there is this little option at the bottom here called work detail. Now, the work detail can be applied to projects, tickets, and retainers. And the work detail is an itemized list of every single time entry or activity created by your team members that is applicable to this project, ticket, or retainer. So including the work detail gives us that area for our report. Now, there is one other section here called work summary. And the two sound pretty similar, so they can sometimes get a little bit confused. The work summary is more so used for your retainers, or if you've used company billing or consolidating billing or invoicing into a single invoice. Now, work summary is really important because it gives you a high-level breakdown of all the different projects and tickets and work objects, and shows you how much exact time you've spent on all of the objects separately. So you can include work summary on your retainer invoices and on company billing as well if you'd like. Now, we do have a few options here to narrow down the work detail, showing only work that's been logged in a period of time. So maybe we want to look at the work that was logged in the last month, last week, anything before today. And then finally, we can choose whether the work detail shows the work that was actually approved by our team, if you do have the approval process built in, or just all that has currently not been invoiced. So leaving those as is, and I might just remove expenses for the moment. Now, again, one quick tip. You will need to save this first and come back to the invoice template so that we can see the changes to be made on the PDF or the visual side for the styling. So now scrolling down to the bottom again, selecting Preview and Edit PDF, we now have this additional section as Work Detail. So like I said before, work detail is the breakdown of all activities, all time logs, everything that your team has actually logged. If we expand this work detail section, we get some options to change the columns, the filtering, and the grouping or sorting. So right now we're grouping by staff member. So that's where we're seeing some of our Accelo team members showing up here. These are some of our devs who originally built this feature for us. But here let's just get rid of the grouping. We just want to show all activities logged together. We can sort by date, by subject, by amount, or we don't have to have a sorting at all. And we can summarize. So this groups even further inside of the table. Now, similarly to what we saw before, where we can update the columns on the right-hand side, we can do the same for the columns in your work detail. Removing things that we don't care about, maybe the avatar isn't really necessary, and maybe we want to rename owner to task completed by. Well, actually, sorry, maybe even better, activity completed by. I think that's going to make more sense. We can include the description as well. So any information that is shared within the activity can also be pulled in and shown. So there was a question about this earlier in the last session. Can you have the option to update the activity, subject, and description? You will need to go back to that activity and update it there. Otherwise, when you create the final invoice, you do have the option to change the line items as well. So you can do it there too. There is one other section here, which is your work summary. And if we want to include the work summary, it's not showing up here because we need to see it in company billing, but you can show a description or resolution for tickets as well. If you don't want work summary, then you can remove it directly here or just untick it from the previous screen. So I hope that helps. This is really showing the work that was logged, giving it to our customers so that they can get that breakdown of report, and then allowing us to include the information or the actual activities that we want to show to the client. There was one other one that I did skip over, which was non-billable. I just remembered then you maybe want to remove non-billable. Maybe your customer doesn't really need to know that information. And if it's non-billable, then does it really need to be on the invoice? So I'm going to save and close and save once again. And now we have 2 invoice templates that can be used depending on the type of work we want to invoice for. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Matty. All right. So now that the invoice templates are ready to go, would you be able to show us some ways that we can incorporate invoicing into our existing workflows? So for example, we want to invoice when a project is first activated and then invoice for the remaining budget at the completion of the project.
All right. So because we've created these 2 invoice templates, they can now be used whenever we decide within Accelo. But in this scenario, we want to kind of build this process into the workflow instead. For example, as Alec mentioned, when a project is activated or when it is completed. So if you think about it, the best place to put that would be within your status progressions. If I go back into projects under types, we have our different statuses for this default project type. Now we can see here, we can go from planned to active as a status progression. And at any point, we can go to complete status. Now, at these points or at the progressions, we can similarly add an action. Now, the invoice itself is a tool that can be used at this process or at this step. And we refer to this as a special process. There's actually quite a lot of really cool automations that you can use in your special processes section, depending on the type of object you're modifying the type for. For example, there's going to be different special processes for retainers, different special processes for tickets and sales compared to projects. By default, in implementation, we will almost always give you the open project plan and assign work special processes when you first create the project. But what we're going to add in now is the actual invoice special process. There's a few others in here that are really quite important. Do we want to complete all outstanding tasks and milestones? Do we want to create a sign-off? Do we want to pause or resume tasks and milestones if a project is paused? So you can get really creative in the different special processes that you use. So leaving this on invoice for the moment. And again, I'm going to add the special process at completion. To invoice, save. And now I'll give you a quick demo of how this works. So if I select projects and I'm going to choose one of my recently viewed projects, let's choose the design brand guidelines as an example. Now this project is still in the planning phase. So The idea here is because we've updated the project type, as soon as we change the status to either active or complete, it's going to prompt us to invoice. So in this scenario, let's mark it as active. We're going to create that 20 or 25% deposit invoice up front. It's opened up the invoice tool and pulled in the details and the total amount for this project. Looks like we have an $8,000 material here, so let's just remove that out and bring it back down to $1,000 here. Now, in this scenario, we want to update the invoice and mark it as a deposit invoice for company X. We can update the bill to contact, the raise date, and the due date. But by default, this is using our net terms that were set in the template. And the template that is being used here is the fixed price template. At the end of the project, maybe you want to use work done, or you could continue using fixed price and maybe change this to the remaining budget. So in this scenario, let's leave this as is and change this to be 20%. Now we're only charging $200 as the 20% deposit invoice up front. Now, like you saw before, we do have service items, and on the template, they can be preset. We can actually preset them in a bunch of locations in Accelo, such as your project templates or the object itself. In this scenario, the service item is just this 1,000 general, which is linked up to the accounting system. And for every line item beneath, we actually get the breakdown on the right-hand side as well. So we can see for this line item, we have the same service code, which is our general account ledger, and it's tax-free. Now, you can always update these yourself if you'd like. And the benefit of updating the service items either on the task, the milestone, or the overall object, is it's going to push over to your QuickBooks or Xero account. And as soon as payment gets made, we know where to update in Accelo. Another example here is maybe if you break down your invoices by milestones, let's say we had all of these milestones showing up and we wanted to invoice for them. Every time we invoice, depending on the milestone, we can change the service code or the service item. So this means that for milestone 1, maybe the payment goes into account 1 and applies a different tax. Or if milestone 2 gets completed, then a different account is the area where the payment's to be made to. So you do have a bunch of functionality and customizations when creating the actual invoice yourself here. Now what I'm going to do is save the invoice. There is the option here to save and send, and this will actually send to your customers. And of course, it will pull in the email activity that we set on the template. For this instance, I'm just going to save the invoice. Okay. So that's how we build invoicing steps and special processes into our progressions on particular types. Remember, they can only be on billable work objects where we can create an invoice, such as a project, a ticket, or a retainer. So I'll leave it back to you, Alec.
All right, sounds good. So this next question we get pretty frequently, and it's definitely worth talking about today. But how can we consolidate all of our unbilled work objects onto a single invoice to be sent out to our clients? So, for example, let's say that it's the end of the month and we want to bill for everything to date.
All right. So some of you, I mean, this is a pretty popular tool as long as you've been invoicing out of Accelo. If you are new to invoicing in Accelo or you're interested in seeing how it can be better optimized, then I'd highly recommend using our company invoice tool. You can get there from the billing expando window on the left and under the first shortcut, company invoice. This is also kind of informally known as bulk billing, where we can consolidate and pull all work objects as long as there's work to be billed into a single invoice. As soon as we select our company invoice tool, we are brought to this page where our wizard can be selected and narrowed down for all the different work objects that we want to include on the invoice. So here we're choosing the fixed price, or if we want, we could choose work done as well. We can narrow down our companies by status. So let's say we have some companies that are vendors that maybe we are to invoice, or if we have some that are maybe in an inactive status that still haven't paid us, maybe we want to include those statuses in here. For every other billable work object, we can dig a little deeper. So for projects, we can choose the statuses or the types that are to be included. We can determine and break down on work done, expenses, and materials to include in the invoice as well. Tickets is pretty similar to projects, and then retainers, you do have some additional filters down below around when the time was actually logged. So do we want to include the time logs into this section on the, if we are consolidating retainers? So an example there might be if you've got a single client with 3 active retainers that handle different parts of the business, but rather than invoicing 3 separate times and creating 3 different invoices, maybe you just create the invoice, or sorry, maybe you don't create the invoice in Accelo on the retainer itself being automated. Instead, use company billing, consolidate all the work together onto a single invoice. So in this scenario, I'm just going to leave everything as is and click the blue button to apply the filters. Now, this is just my dummy account where I've filled in some information, but for you all, you should have plenty of customers showing up in your results here. You will be able to navigate through to find the companies that you're looking for and include only those you want to bill. You can select all of them by selecting the tick box at the top, and that will pre-populate for the invoice wizard down below. Now we're showing up with 1 project and 3 tickets. Now, I know we've already billed for the upfront of the project as that deposit invoice, so I don't really need to include any more on this invoice that we're creating now. So I can exclude that one. Now we're only going to be billing for 3 tickets. If I start the invoice wizard at the bottom right, this is now doing the consolidation process and showing only those billable work objects that we are not yet invoiced for. Now you'll see some of the same kind of terminology that you saw just before when we created that single invoice and mapped it to the project. Here we want to include the 3 tickets. Now each of these have a different value and totaling at 1,220. We do have the option to edit and preview the PDF, so we can take a look and see what is being pulled in. We have our 3 tickets showing up below. Now we don't have any PO number because we didn't apply them to the tickets, but you would assume that your PO numbers could pull into the invoices once they are created. Or if you create the consolidated invoice from the company level, then the PO numbers will appear as well. I'm going to save and close and create this invoice. And that's how you consolidate into a single invoice. Thank you, Alec.
All right. So now that we've created invoices through a few different methods, could you share with us the ways that you'd go about finding the invoices that you need? And then walk us through how we might narrow it down to only show the invoices that are perhaps overdue or haven't yet been sent to the client.
Awesome. I know we are actually coming up to time pretty quickly, so I'm going to speed through this last piece so we can hopefully get to a couple Q&A questions there. But of course, we can find your invoices in a bunch of locations in Accelo. Firstly, we can go to the work object that the invoice was created against. So in this case, where we created the invoice against our project, there is this billing tab on the right. Selecting billing shows the most recent invoice. We know this was the $200 deposit invoice. Now, at the end of the project, when we bill for the remaining, then this is going to show with the second invoice for the remaining value of $800. The most recent or the latest invoice will show up at the top, and you can always select the invoice and view it and make tweaks and adjustments as you need. That will update in QuickBooks or Xero as well. Now, one other option is to view the company. So we've created a couple invoices today, and all of those invoices are now going to be accessible on the billing tab on the company level. So there's a few in here. We can see some were paid, one is overdue, and we've got two that were created and are still in terms or due in 14 days. Now, the final area where you can find your invoices is, of course, your invoice list. So selecting on the billing expando window, on the left, we have shared lists, which will quickly take you to the list you're looking for. I know one of the examples was those that were overdue. In this example, I'm just going to see all invoices to get the full breakdown. And here we can, again, select the lists or the filters on the left-hand side. Now, there was one other, I think maybe those that have not yet been sent. I love this option. It's a bit of a miscellaneous one, but any invoices that have not yet been sent or have been sent, we can choose this here. So if I select no, it's removed one because we have sent one out. So I can save this as a filter, unsent invoices, and share this with the rest of the team. Now, for your finance team or whoever it is who sends the invoices, they can quickly click this button. It narrows down the results. Then they can go into each invoice and send them out when it's ready, maybe at the end of the month. Hope that helps.
All right. Thank you very much, Matty. So we are coming up on time, so I'll kind of breeze through this. But what you've seen today is an example of how an expert services session might run. Expert services are open and collaborative discussions specific to the topics that you need support with. They're customized to help you solve problems or, optimize processes that are really unique to your business. So some examples of what would be covered could include assistance when you need to tackle challenges and find some quick resolutions, detailed account audits to help improve and optimize your configuration, and then also advanced end user training, focused on the topics most important to your team. If you're interested in finding out more about expert services, you can email success@accelo.com, and an account manager such as myself will arrange a 30-minute, no obligation scoping call to understand your challenges and propose some recommended sessions to resolve them. You can also find some more information about this on our Success Services webpage, which is located at the bottom of this slide. And for reference, it is accelo.com/resources/services. All right, so we'll use the remaining couple minutes here to answer some Q&A. Definitely appreciate everyone posting those questions. And like I mentioned before, we will 100% get back to you via email with some answers for the ones that we won't be able to get to today. But with that being said, we got a question about how to show overages on invoices. So for example, perhaps like excess time that might be logged in a retainer. Could you quickly show us how you might go about doing that, Matty? Oh, Matty, I think you're on mute if you're trying to talk, by the way, as well.
Thank you. Sorry. Excess on retainers. I do know that on your retainers, underneath your settings, on retainers, we do have your retainer types, and under your retainer type settings, sorry, I'm going a little quick here, underneath the settings here, we do have the option to include excess rates. So if you have this setting toggled on and you are charging excess or over the amount that was allocated in the usage or the allowance, then whatever the excess is going to be included on the invoice. So if you have this to be prepaid or a set budget allowance, then any excess won't be charged. But if it's the flip side, then you can charge the excess. I know that was really quick, and I will be careful to go into more detail in the recap email for whoever asked that question. But yeah, really good question there on excess. That is super important, especially for tickets linked to retainers.
All right, thank you. And another one that we got is they're wondering how they can have the invoice due date on, let's say, like the 20th of the month following the invoice creation date. So they want it to basically the due date to be the 20th, but it's not 20-day terms per se.
Okay, so I think in this scenario, I don't believe there's a way that we can set the 20th day specifically without doing it manually. It really depends when you create the first invoice. So on every single invoice, you do have the option to set the raise date and the due date. If it's, let's say, 10 days into the month, then setting the due date on the 20th will have to be done manually. So the net terms or the default net terms are going to preset and pre-select that date for you, but you will always have the option. Now, in the case of a retainer, then if you are billing, let's say for a prepaid retainer at the start of the month, and you want to set that 20-day net term, so it's always billed on the 20th day, then the retainer is going to be a better tool to use there. For example, we're billing at the start, the very first day of the month for the total, but the due date is 20 days, and we can therefore apply the 20-day net term. Hope that helps.
All right. Thanks, Matty. And we'll do one last question here, but then after we answer this one, we'll keep the chat open for another couple minutes so that you guys can get some last minute questions in there, and then we'll reply afterwards via email just to give you that context. But another one that we pulled up was they're wondering if there is a way to set up their retainers to automatically generate an invoice as soon as the retainer period gets created.
Okay, let's see. So similarly to the other questions around retainers, we can renew the period at a certain amount of days. And when that retainer period is renewed, we can do the action. So in this scenario, if we are automatically creating the invoice and wanting to send the invoice, then whenever the new period is created, 0 days, that is exactly what's going to happen. So the automated invoice will get created. This will only happen for prepaid retainers though. Postpaid retainers, it's not going to work because that does require some manual review before automating and, before being able to send them out. There's no automation built in. So if you would like, you can actually renew the period early and send the invoice earlier as well. So for example, if you want to invoice for November 15th of October, then setting this to be 15 days before the period expires, so before October ends, will allow us to create the invoice for November and send it out automatically.
All right, great. So this brings us to the end of our live training webinar. We really hope that this was helpful for you all. As I mentioned before, I'm just going to give a last, goodbye message or whatever you want to call it, but please feel free to keep those questions coming into the chat while I'm doing this. They'll all get answered via email as soon as we can. I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for joining today. As mentioned before, we're going to be sending the video recording to everyone along with a feedback survey. And within that survey, you can include topic areas that you'd like to see covered in future webinars. We have a number of topics already planned for future sessions, but we'd really like to hear from you all to understand the challenges that you might be going through so that we can tackle these topics in other sessions. You'll also be receiving an invitation to these future webinars, and this recording will be available on our website as well. So with that being said, let's wait another minute or so. We'll let those last minute chats come in. And that's all that we have today though. And once again, thank you for your time.
Thanks everyone.